Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning to our teachers and students joining us this morning for the Region 1 Mathematics Workshop for Grade 4. My name is Carol Harris, and I'm one of the assigned coaches for the Region 1 Math team. And along with me this morning will be Mr. Javan Alimi, and we'll be doing together with you a workshop on exploring fractions. So before we begin, I'll just pause for a word of prayer. So we just ask everyone to settle a bit, and we pause for a word of prayer, and then we go right into today's workshop. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks this morning. We thank you for life. We thank you for health. We thank you for every ability and every gift that you've given us. And as we meet today on this topic, that is often a difficult topic or often a challenge topic, we thank you, Lord, that you are the one who is the origin of all wisdom and knowledge. We ask you to help us to impart the knowledge and our students and teachers to grasp and get new or different or reminders about how we can teach, how we can learn this topic. And we just commit everything into your hands. Cover the technology, cause that we have no glitches and that things go smoothly and that everything will be done to your glory and honor. We ask all these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. So thank you very much. As we start, we want to remind you, we are trying to have it as interactive as possible. So we want for you, when you are ready to answer a question that we ask, that you raise your hand, don't talk into the mic at the same time. Raise your hand and we will go through as quickly as we can to pick up who is raising their hand and try to get you in that sequence. Otherwise, we'll ask you to type in the chat and wait for the question before you try to answer so that we can have it in order. Secondly, I'd like all teachers to type in the chat for us, please, the school that you are from and the number of students who are present. So that's the school you're from and the number of students present. We need all those things for our records. At the very end, we will give you a what you call it now, an evaluation form.
Evaluation sheet, yes.
We'll give an evaluation sheet that will come in Google Forms, and we're going to ask you to fill it out as a teacher with this class, and you score it, give us your feedback. All right, so we're looking forward to a great time, and we'll roll right into it. So thank you for joining, and let's explore fractions together. Incidentally, we'll also be streaming on YouTube by our channel, your Region 1 Math Team channel, and we will post that link in the chat in a few, and which will allow you the time, teachers, children, to go back to it. And so let's go right into it. And so for today, we're looking forward to have a session in which you're going to be using benchmark fractions, at least one possible benchmark fraction, in order to learn how to estimate fractions or compare fractions, and not only compare them, but order the fractions with different denominators. Okay, so that's where we're aiming for. Pardon me a minute, please.
So we are gonna, continue.
Right, so as we start, the first thing that we'll do, let me make sure my phone is not gonna disturb us again, because I didn't get to do that before we began. So I do crave your understanding. All right, so we go right into it. We're gonna start off with our vocabulary. In math, language is critical because we use, generally speaking, understanding across the math world for various things. So the first thing that we want to look at is the numerator of a fraction. I know for one moment we're gonna, Sarah, could you just put up the denominator one for me, please? Because that one kind of sets the tone. But we'll look at it a little later. So there are two things we want to know about a fraction. The first is the denominator, really, because that's what tells us what family name or how we're going to name the fraction. So that denominator tells us the number of equal parts that make up the whole. But there's another part of the fraction, it's the numerator, and that tells us the number of parts that we're talking about at a given time. So the denominator gives us the family name, And we often use this comparison. My name is Carol Harris. So my father's name is Harris. Most cultures will use the father's name. There are some cultures that actually include the mother's name. But once you see a Harris, typically means that their father is a Harris. And so they're from the family of Harrises. And you will have a family name. Mr. Lee will have relatives whose name is Lee. And you will use that name in order to identify and name different persons in the family. So a fraction family will also follow that same pattern or that same rule. With fraction families, we normally use ordinal numbers. So you will, except for halves and halves. So you don't say seconds, you don't say 1 second. You'll say a half, and you will talk about thirds and fourths and fifths. And so we name fractions based on ordinal numbers, and that gives the denominator, which is the number that is placed below the fraction bar. And that number tells you how we're gonna know what the fraction is. So you have to keep that in mind. It's equal parts, and it's equal parts into which the whole has been shared or divided. Okay, it's a number of equal parts. Now we also have different types of fractions. We have proper fractions. What are proper fractions? Before we to put up what are proper fractions, let's share what you know, because I know you're not coming here totally with nothing. So share with me what you know about a proper fraction. You can raise your hand and I'll see who is raising their hand, and then I'll allow you to speak. Anybody would like to quickly share what's a proper fraction? No raised hands. Remember, I want you to engage with us. Don't be sitting there. Go ahead. I think that's Mona. Is that Mona Prep? Merlin Francis's class?
Go ahead,
Proper fraction is a fraction which the numerator is smaller than the denominator.
Thank you very much for that one. Indeed, you are so correct. It is a fraction in which the numerator is smaller than the denominator. Great. Thank you for that one. So we have hit it off, going very well, a fraction with a numerator that is smaller than the denominator. Now, in language arts, you learn opposites, don't you? You might put a prefix before the word that tells you that it's going to be opposite. So I can be satisfied or dissatisfied. You can be polite, but when you're not polite, someone would say you're impolite. So if a proper fraction is one where the numerator is smaller than the denominator, let's pretend you never heard before about improper fractions, but you now know that improper represents an opposite. Tell me, who would like to tell me what's an improper fraction now that you know what a proper fraction is? Okay, so Donnie Jones's class is ready to tell us. Go ahead and tell us about that, please.
Yes, Cassidy. Cassidy.
An improper fraction is a fraction in which the numerator is bigger than the denominator.
Excellent. It was a little low, so I'll say it again. It's one in which the numerator is larger than the denominator. So we're setting the tone and getting our vocabulary out of the way and having everybody aware of our vocabulary. I wouldn't say just aware, but reminding us, because I don't believe it's fresh news. I believe most of you know it, but we need to just revisit it and make sure we're all on the same page. Great. Thank you, teachers, for bringing in that information. Continue to bring it in, please, regarding their school and the number of students that are from the school present. All right, now let's move into some symbols and signs, because as we talk about things, we have to represent it in a particular way. So we're going to talk about some signs and symbols that we use, because today we'll be looking at comparing fractions. And when you compare things, you're going to have at least two things. And the first one we want to look at is greater than, and the greater than symbol. The secondly, we have the less than symbol. Third, we have the equal to symbol. Now, if you notice, the greater than symbol has the open end to the left, while the less than symbol has the open end to the right. What do I mean by the open end? It's a part that is wider. You have a pointed part and a wider part. Now, for some reason, we all are different. Persons sometimes get a little confused. But one of the things I usually remind my students of is this. The open part always points to the larger quantity. It always points to the greater quantity. So the part that is open, some people talk about the alligator mouth, but the open part always goes to the larger quantity. And the pointed part always goes to the smaller quantity. Now, since we read from left to right in Jamaica, so if I have, for example, I have 3 is less than 5. Notice the smaller part is pointing to the 3, so it would say that 3 is less than 5. Now, the funny thing, well, I shouldn't say the funny thing, the interesting thing is that I could also say from this same statement that 3 is less than 5. Where is the open part pointing to? It's pointing to the 5. So I could also have said 5 is greater than 3. That same statement, this statement tells me the same thing, although it's using the less than sign. So don't get confused. Just remember that the open part or the wider part always points to the larger quantity. So I can also read this as saying 5 is greater than 3. So we want to get that out of the way. So though you see the less than sign, there is no harm in saying that 5 is greater than 3, because it's that statement is reading 2 things at the same time. Because if 3 is less than 5, it means that 5 must be greater than 3. Good. So want to have that very clear, that though you see the less than sign, it's not incorrect to say 5 is greater than 3, because the statement is saying the same thing. All right, great. So let's move along. Let's move along. I know most of you, if not all of you, love pizza. Now, some of you may not be pork eaters, so you might want your vegetarian pizza or your plain cheese or chicken or whatever the case may be. So let's talk about some pizza. I wanted to meet Joe. He's the pizza man, and he's selling this pizza. So we have this pizza that we want to share. Talk to me about this pizza that Joe has held up in his hand. Let me see now. Who would like to tell me, if you were to name a fraction, how many equal parts would you say this whole has been made up in? How many slices do you see here based on what you see on the screen? How many slices do you see? Let me see that hand or hands. Okay. Since Merlin Francis is, I'm going to ask Millicent Clark Stewart's class to go ahead and tell us what you see from this. How many slices can you see or do you see? From Millicent Clark Stewart's class, go right ahead, please. You haven't unmuted it. Go ahead, yes.
I see 6.
You see 6 equal parts. All right, great. And I think we all see 6. There are 6 equal parts here, 3 at the upper part. So we could say this pizza is made up of or cut up into 6 equal parts. 6 equal parts. So if I were to name a fraction using this pizza, type in the chat for me. Type in the chat for me, please. What would be the family name for this fraction? Go right ahead and type in the chat. What would be the family name for this fraction? What would you say is the family name for this fraction? Not seeing anything in the chat. Talk to me, boys and girls. 1 whole or 6, 6, okay. It will be made up of 6. How would you write that in words? Not so much in numbers. What would the fraction name? 6. Great. Thank you very much for that. It would be 6. Students responding are very much. Now, I want the family name. I know it's a whole. We have a whole fraction here, but the whole could have been divided into other different number of parts. I could have had it divided into just 2 parts. So the family name is 6. Thank you so much for that. 6. I see a 6 with IXT, but I know that was meant to be an S. So 6, great. We're on the right track and we're doing well. Now, let's talk about a little bit now. We couldn't have this beautiful, lovely, tasty, delicious pizza and not have some of it. So a piece has been taken out of this. So Jim, who had the pizza that Joe had, said, I had 1/2 of the pizza. I had 1/2 since there are 2 pieces. There were 2 pieces rather. I ate 1 and 1 is left. Would you agree with Jim? Yes or no, and tell me why. When you say yes, tell me why. When you say no, tell me why. So that might take a little talking. So raise your hand and we'll open our mics and allow you to and open your mic. So once you raise your hand, I'll acknowledge you. And then you can say whether you agree that Jim saying he had half of the pizza, since there were 2 pieces, I ate 1 and 1 is left. Let me hear if you agree with Jim or you disagree. Okay, go ahead with Sedona Jones's class.
Go ahead, Quinn. Louder. Louder.
I disagree with Jim because there are 4 pieces but not 2.
There are 4 pieces. Okay. How come you see 4? Anybody see 4 pieces? I'm looking really keenly, but I don't see 4 pieces. I see 2 pieces. I don't see it divided in 4. Mrs. Jones, you agree with her that there are 4 pieces?
4 slices.
You see 4 slices? I only see 2 pieces, but hey, I wear glasses. Maybe I'm not seeing so well. Mrs. So you agree that it is a half or do you disagree? You disagree? You disagree because there are 4 pieces? I'm not hearing you so well. All right, we'll go ahead. All right, Ms. Jones, we'll come back. If anything, I'll come back. Ms. Francis's class, go ahead, please.
So it is 1/4 of the pizza.
So do you agree or do you disagree?
Do you agree that he had a half?
No, I disagree.
And why do you disagree?
Because if he
Peter one chance.
if he ate one half of the pizza, what part of the pizza wouldn't be there? Which is the top left part? No, the top right part.
So
The top right.
here's my challenge. Can I tell you where I have a challenge, boys and girls? I am not seeing where this pizza is divided. But as I said, I wear glasses. Maybe I'm not seeing so well. Is it correct to say it's a half? I'm not. Do you see 4 equal parts?
Did I say that?
For those who say no, is it because you believe it's divided into 4 equal parts? Talk to me. Miss Francis, your class mic is still open. You can finish your thought. And if anything, I can move on to someone else. You disagree that it's not a half. Tell me why. Is there anything in the chat, Mr. Lime? Okay,
No,
nothing in the
not
chat
so far.
because we asked you to open your to share by raising your hand.
It's not a half because one of the pizza pieces wouldn't be there, and it's the top right part. Because
The reason why I say it is a half is because one of the pieces is bigger than the other half. Than the other piece.
One piece is bigger than the other. So why is that? Why is something wrong with that? Why is it that is not a half? Because one is bigger than the other. What's important? I don't see this.
Because a half always has to be the same size.
Oh, they must be the same size. Anybody wants to chime in with another word for saying the same size? Go ahead, Miss Jones's class. Equal, great. Thank you very much, great. Which school is Miss Jones at?
Mona Prep.
Mona Prep. Okay, thank you for that, Mona Prep. So everyone's seen that it could not be a half because the 2 pieces are not equal. And when that half is written, what's in the denominator for a half? 2, correct? And if it is half and we have 2 parts, the 2 parts must be equal. The parts must be equal. So let's continue then. So as you said, one part is bigger than the other. How much of a whole pizza did Joe eat if this is left? You can type this one in the chat, but type it in words and tell me how you know. How much of this pizza did Joe eat if this is left? And how do you know? A half? Remember, you're telling me how you know as well. The how you know part is important because we need to learn to justify our answer. Miss Davidson, Annalisa Davidson, could you go ahead and let me hear what your children have to say?
Half or 3/6.
Okay, half or 3/6. Well, why they're saying it 3/6 is the way we write it. When we say the name of the fraction, we should really say that 3 what?
3 what?
3/6.
3
You'd
what?
say 3/6
3 6.
rather than 3/6. 3/6 is really how we write it. But if we were to really say its name, 3/6 would be like a pet name.
3/6 is 3 6.
So that's how you write it. That's the representation. That's how you write it. However, the name would be 3/6. So I see a number of persons typing in half in the chat. And I thank you for those responses. And we're all spot on right there. Okay. So let's press on with that and see. So why are we having this discussion about fractions anyway? I mean, why is it so important? Let's talk about that. Why do I need fractions? The other day I was talking with a principal of a school, and the person was sharing with me about a former student from his primary school where the child was now going into carpentry, and they were unable to properly measure the pieces of wood. Why? Because it has, the rule is divided into 16ths and 8ths, but because he wasn't paying close enough attention in his fractions class, he wasn't able to see that the difference in one unit that was divided into 8 parts or whatever number of parts, so that he could now properly measure. So you're probably gonna see fractions again. If you ever have to measure a length of pipe, a length of 2x4, as we say in Jamaica, if you have to measure some wood, if you have to do anything like that with construction work, you must measure, and you're gonna end up with some fractional values. So that's one place you're gonna need fractions. What about this other one? What do you think this one is representing? Type in the chat what this one is representing, if you're familiar with it. What does this one represent? Anybody knows? Okay, fuel or gas, it's the meter or the gauge for the gas, or I should say fuel, in a motor vehicle. The F stands for, if you were a fraction, what would the F stand for? The F would stand for what? Talk to me. Students' response, what will you tell your teacher that the F stands for? Rashik, all right, I see your mic open, although I didn't see the hand up. What would you say F stands for? Mrs. All right? Okay, I see Merlin Francis's class is saying 1 whole. Okay. Miss Jones's class and Flo May Williams Powell's class is saying full, but the full represents, that's what the F stands for. But if you were to talk about a fraction, what would it represent? A whole? Thank you. It represents 1 whole. And what would the E represent then? If F represents 1 whole rather, and E represents empty. So what do you think empty would represent? nothing in the tank, okay? Let me see if E would represent nothing in the tank, 0 or nothing in the tank. And notice that you have that half on that bold white marker saying that it is half. You see that half mark there? So it's telling us that the tank will be half full whenever that red needle goes to that white mark. So we're talking about half. And you don't want to go, typically they encourage us not to go too far below the half because they might have problems with the fuel and stuff. So you need to know about the fractions. You need to know what's happening with your half. So those are two everyday examples. A third one is in the kitchen. We all love Christmas, but not all, but most of us love Christmas cake or pastry of some kind. And I know for some of you who love pastry, you probably want to become a pastry chef. No, you can't become a pastry chef and not be familiar with fractions. You're gonna run into trouble because most recipes will have fractional quantities. So notice this has half a teaspoon of salt. You must be able to recognize those fractions when they're written on the utensils, on the little things that they sell for the bakers to use. Otherwise, you're gonna have problems. If you mix up 1/3 with 1/2, it's going to spoil your recipe. So you have to be aware of that. So fractions will be encountered. You'll meet fractions at some point in your life, at some point. So let's quickly review. What is a fraction? Could someone tell me in your own words what's a fraction before we move on, before we put it up? What's a fraction? It's a fraction. Yeah, let me not say anything more. What's a fraction? Anybody typing or saying anything?
A whole divided into equal parts.
A whole divided into equal parts. Miss Francis's class has the same thing. Should I scroll through and ask anyone? Or it depends. Anyone else would like to share what a fraction is?
An equal part of a whole.
An equal part of a whole. Okay. An equal part of a whole. Another person says a whole divided into equal parts. We seem to be coming in with some keywords there. The equal parts and the shared. Anything else? A fraction is a? A fraction is a part of a whole. A fraction is a part of a whole, okay. And what's important about the whole? Go ahead, Drews Avenue. It's a part of a whole, but what's very important about that whole that we spoke about earlier? Can you remember?
No, wait and listen.
Can you remember what was important about that whole?
A fraction is a part of a whole.
All right, thank you for that. All right, then, sir, let's continue. Most persons remember that's a part of a whole, but there's an important part. It's a number that represents equal parts of a whole. That word equal must never, ever, 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 ever be left out when you're looking at a fraction. You must bear in mind that it is representing equal parts. That equal, that is why when Joe said, not Joe, Jim, when Jim said he ate a half, he was wrong because the whole was not in equal parts. There were two parts, but the two parts were not equal. And if the parts are not equal, then you're unable to properly name the fraction or correctly name the fraction. So that's something we want to make sure we're clear on. So if you were to name this fraction using the number of equal parts of the whole, what would you name it? Type in the chat for us quickly, please. What would you name it if you were to talk about the number of the fraction that is shown here? Looking at the colored parts, for each of these want to hear the fraction that the colored part represents. Any responses in the chat? None yet, okay. 1/2, but I don't see two equal parts. I don't say it's not a half, just wanting to know. It is a, what would you say? If you were to name, okay, 2/4, 2/4, okay, 2/4. And as you rightly simplified or made it in lower terms, you said 1/2. Good. Drews Avenue, I see you raised your hand. What would you like to share? Do you agree with the 2/4 or you disagree? A half, or the funny thing with this one is that this is sort of showing you, no, let's not go there right now. So there are 2 parts that are shaded out of 4 parts. So it's gonna be how many fourths did you say, Drews Avenue? How many fourths? How many fourths do you see shaded? 2. Okay, so there are 2 quarters or 2/4 that have been shaded.
2/4.
Great.
Shaded area
2/4
you're talking
or
about.
2/4. So we're looking at the shaded parts. All right. So what about this one, this next one that's up? Did I just see, okay, the hands are down. Any hands up yet for this one? All right, Miss Wilmot's class, let me hear from Miss Wilmot's class. What fraction do we have colored or shaded here?
1/4.
1/4 or 1/4, great. 1/4 or 1/4, excellent. Thank you for that. I think that's not a thing, that is Holy Family. All right, let me see now, who else I haven't heard from? All right, Elitsa Primary, you're gonna take the next one. So 1/4 is indeed correct. Just a quick one before I move on, before Elitsa tells me the next one. Mrs. Clark Stewart's class. So what fraction is not shaded? What fraction is a white part? What would you say, Mrs. Clark Stewart's class, before I move on to Ellison? 1/4 is colored. What about the other part? That's not colored. It's white. How many fourths is that? Mrs. Clark Stewart's class?
You're saying?
You're telling me how much is not shaded in this second one? 3. What's a fraction that's not shaded? You can't give me one number. Okay, I see some persons answering in the chat.
Which?
The purple or the green?
The purple or the green?
No, man, the unshaded part, the one that's not colored, the white part or gray, whichever one you want to call it. So the yellow part is shaded for the second diagram, the one to the right. The purplish part is shaded. What's the fraction that is not colored with this white or gray, whichever color you want to use? Go ahead, Mrs. Clark Stewart's class. All right, Ellison, take the next one for me, please. We're gonna give the third one, and I would like Ellison Primary to tell me what is the fraction that is colored. So let's call this one letter C. What fraction is colored, Ellison Primary? Three quarters. Okay. Ellison Primary said 3/4. Is there another name you would give it? Or that you want to type in the chat another name you could call it? 3/4 or what else?
3/4.
3/4, excellent. So this 3/4 in this last one is colored, but the 3/4 was not colored in the second one. So when you're naming a fraction, you have to look out for what part you're talking about at any given time. So you have to look out for the part, because remember that represents your numerator. Which part, how many parts are we talking about at that given time? So notice that I have fourths in both B and C, but in one, I'm naming or I'm looking at the 1/4, whereas in the second one, I'm looking at 3/4. So you have to be careful to say what fraction you're talking about or that's being discussed at the given time or we're naming or singling out at that time, okay? So we have to be careful with that. Great, thank you, sir. We'll move on to this one, all right. Some typing time. For item A, I have named a part, but of how many parts? Type in the chat for me, what would be the number of parts that I have named that are supposed to be naming this fraction? Tell me about that. What would go in this? Oh Lord, what is that word again? Who would like to tell me? It's 1/2. So the number, that 2 represents what? Go ahead, Miss Davidson's class. What's the name for the number that I'm putting in that's missing in A again? What's the name of that part of the fraction again, and what should it be? Go ahead, Miss Davidson's class. There's something missing from my fraction. It has a name. I'd like you to tell me what that name, what the name of that part is, and why it is the number that you have. Go ahead.
Pardon me?
I'd like you to tell me the name of the fraction that's missed, the name of the part of the fraction that is missing for letter A, and the number that should go there, and why it is that number, sir. What is the name of that? So start there. What's the name of the part that's missing? What's the name of the part of the fraction that's missing? Okay, you are correct. So sir is highlighting it for you. What's the name of that part of the fraction?
I can't hear you.
Oh, she said she's not hearing, but Mrs. Jones and Miss Marlene,
Sound is not so
Francis
amplified,
said
so we're not
denominator.
hearing clearly.
Oh, you're not hearing so clearly? All right. Let me ask, let me see, who was there a while ago? Who did I just ask a while ago? Mrs. Clark Stewart's class? Yes. Was it? So let me see if anybody answered in the chat as to what part of the fraction it is. Okay, I'm seeing some denominators there. That's exactly right. And I asked what part, what's the number that you'd put there and why? So you're gonna tell me 3 things in your answer: the part, the number that should go there, and why you're putting that number. I know it's a mouthful, but I'm gonna say it again. The name for the part, the number that should go there, and why. So it's the denominator and it should be 2. And why is it 2? Go ahead, Ms. Sparks. You can fill in the last part of the question. So denominator and 2. Why am I making it 2? Ms. Sparks' class.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good
Because
morning.
it is half.
So why is it halves? I don't know why it is half. What makes it half?
Because it cut in 2 parts.
2
2 equal
parts?
parts.
2 beautiful. Yay. I'm hearing my keyword. 2 equal parts, because it's been divided into 2 equal parts, and those 2 equal parts would make them 2 halves. And so the denominator would be 2, and it's 2 because the whole has been divided into 2 equal parts. Beautiful. Let's move on to letter B. What would you tell me about letter B? Letter B. Let me see what's coming in the chat, or not seeing any raised hands yet. Let's see what's coming in the chat for letter B. What fraction of the shape is shaded? Okay, I see 1/4 coming from Elliotson. All right, 1/4 from Holy Family, great. And while we're doing this, by the way, if you have not yet typed in the chat your school and the number of students present, I really would appreciate that you put that in, please, teachers. Your school and the number of students present. Great, it's 1/4 or 1/4 because I have, so if it's 1/4, what would be the number in the denominator then? For I see Tanya Parks' class typing in 1/4. So the number above the fraction bar, which we call the denominator would be what again? 4, okay, so we can put in our 4 because that's what tells us the fraction name. And the numerator will be 1, as some of you have put, you've already told me it's 1/4. So great. Let's move on to part C then. So we have a half, we have 1/4. Thank you for that feedback, Mrs. Larmon. So if you haven't yet typed it in, please go ahead and type in your school name and the number of students. If you have not yet done so, please do so. At some point, you can type it in the chat. That's perfectly fine. Or if you, yes, type it in the chat, please. That would be helpful. Or we do need that information. It has 4 equal parts and we have 1 selected. Great. What about letter C? What would we say for letter C? One 6. I see that from Elliotson Primary, it's 1/6. And why is it 6 in the denominator? Why is it 6 in the denominator? Anybody wants to type quickly or raise their hand? All right, I'm seeing a hand raised. Go ahead, Miss. Let me see who is. Go ahead, Miss Clark Stewart's class. Why is it 6 in the denominator? It's 6 parts. What's that keyword they're missing out? It's. What's that important word that you're missing out? It's 6 parts, but what's important about those 6 parts? Remember, when we're talking about fractions, we can't afford to leave that out. It's 6 what kind of parts?
Go ahead.
Okay, we're getting a feedback. Go ahead, Miss Parks' class. I'm seeing some persons answering the chat. Thank you for that feedback.
Because it is 6 equal parts.
6 equal parts. Great, thank you. That keyword equal must be there regarding the denominator. Thank you. I see some feedback. The keyword is equal. Once we're naming a fraction, we have to talk about the equal parts into which the whole has been divided. Great. Final one for this little activity before we move on. Are we ready for this one? Let's go quickly. Need to move on a little bit more quickly based on our timing. Last one, type in the chat quickly. What is this name for this last one? Just type in the chat for us. For the final one. We have equal as a keyword, name of the fraction, 2/3, great. I see that from Elliotson Primary. Anyone else would? So 2/3 is great. I think most of us are aware it's 2/3. I'm loving that you're spelling it out. Beautiful. You're writing the name and as well as the numeral for it. Excellent. So you have the 2/3, not 2 3s, it's 2/3 because we're going to use the ordinal name for the fraction. Fantastic. So we've reviewed our fractions and we can now move on to another aspect of our time together. Look at this flag. How much of this flag would you say is red? By the way, I believe this is the flag for Greenland, which is way up in the north, that circle, I think it's the Arctic Circle. I'm not remembering now, one of those temperate zones, but it's not a social studies class, it's Harris, it's maths. All right, talk to me now. Would you say the fraction of the flag is, what fraction of this flag is, was it less than a half, equal to a half, or greater than a half? All right, I see Miss Wilmot's class is out of the blocks. We're gonna type in the chat for now. So go ahead, I see half coming from Elliotson, half coming from Miss Wilmot's class, Any more halves? All right, tell me. Is it less than okay, I see other halves coming in. Okay. And I think we can concur that it is equal to a half. If you're having difficulty seeing why it's equal to a half, what you could do is try to, as it were, turn the circular part over so that everything, all the red is on one side. And you'd find that all the white would fit on the top half, or the red would fit on the bottom half, and you'll see that half is red and half is white. So it is in fact equal to a half. The red flag has one half of it that is red, and the other half, of course, is gonna be white. Okay, so it's equal to a half, and we're all in agreement there. Great. So we can sign off on that, that it is in fact equal to 1/2. Great. What about this rectangle? What fraction of the rectangle is red? Again, is it greater than a half, less than a half, or equal to a half? What fraction is red? And how do you know? Let's see what you're saying in the chat. What fraction is red and how do you know? All right, Juice Avenue saying less than a half. Is it Andre Blackwood's class? Is your hand up to say something? You can open your mic and go ahead.
Less than a half.
How do you know it's less than a half?
Less than a half.
Yes, how do you know?
Because
That how is important. How do you know? Okay. Anybody
because
else?
the white part is bigger than the red part.
Beautiful. It doesn't divide it into two equal parts. The white part is bigger than the two red parts put together. All right. And how did you pick up that the two red parts are? And that's excellent. You're picking up that one part of it is bigger than the other. And once it's not two equal parts, it cannot be a half. It's either going to be less than a half or more than a half. So the red part is actually less than a half. And we're all in agreement there because they are not two equal parts. So if we want to look at the rectangle a little bit more, we could have shaded, we could have divided the rectangle that we had into equal parts. How many equal parts do we see here? Type in the chat quickly. How many parts do we see here? How many equal parts? There are 6 equal parts. Let's see how many persons are agreeing that it's 6. Anybody else disagrees that it's 6 equal parts? Great. I'm only seeing one, but it's kind of in our face, so we know it's 6 equal parts. There are 6 equal parts here, and only 2 of those 6 are shaded. There are 6 equal parts, and only 2 are shaded. And half of 6 would be how much? How much is half of 6? 3. Okay, that's 1 3 from Gold Ellison, Sidoni Jones's school. I think that was what, Mona Prep, I believe. Anybody else would say that half of 6 is 3 or less than? It would be 3. And that 2 is less than 3. This is one of our comparison phrases. 2 is less than 3. And since half of 6 is 3, then these two 6 that are shaded would be less than a half. Beautiful. So it is in fact less than a half because it is 2 6 that is shaded. Great. So you knew because some person said it earlier on, the white part is bigger than the red part. And if it's bigger, it means they're not equal, and it must be equal for it to be half. And the big part, the red part, is a little bit less than the white part. So it couldn't be equal to a half. It has to be less than a half. I see you doing some good reasoning and you were able to say it in your own words. Fantastic. So we'll move on from there. Let's see. A benchmark. What on earth is that word? I wonder if it's a bench that we sit on. What is a benchmark? Does anyone know what a benchmark is? Type in the chat quickly for me, please. If you know the word benchmark and what it means. What's a benchmark? I wonder, is it a mark on a bench? I use a marker, I use paint and I mark the bench. What is a benchmark? Tell me about that. Anyone knows what a benchmark is? You want to, didn't see any hands raised on that one. What is a benchmark? Anyone knows? Raise your hand so I can see who it is before you open the mic, please. Anyone knows what a benchmark is? Well, one thing I say, it's not a mark on a bench. Okay, it's not a mark on a bench. All right, go ahead, Miss Jones's class. What's a benchmark in your own words?
A way of representing fractions based on value.
A way of representing fractions based on?
Value.
On the value, a way of representing fractions based on the value. Okay, thank you for that contribution. Anyone else with what they think a benchmark is? One person says it's a way of representing the value of a fraction based on, way of representing a fraction based on its value. All right, anything else on that? All right, looks like we're going quiet on me, and I didn't want it to go quiet on me. But we're going to look at what a benchmark is and what would that from, and based on that, what is a benchmark fraction? A benchmark is a point of reference, something that you have an idea of that you use in order to get another quantity. So for example, when mommy is cooking for the family, she might be cooking some rice or so, she has in her mind's eye, sometimes the word for that is visualizing, she visualizes, she has in her mind's eye a quantity, an amount of rice that is a cup, because she's been doing it for years. And yet let's say she knows that 2 cups of rice is needed for the family. So she knows that she doesn't have to take a cup and measure it because she has a mental picture, she has a visual in her mind as to what a cup of rice looks like. So she's able to use her knowledge of that. She has a point of reference. She has something in her mind that she can use so that she can estimate or measure what she needs for cooking for the whole family. So similarly, a benchmark fraction is a picture that we visualize in our mind, what it looks like. Where would it be? Where would it be? What can I picture 1/4 to be or 1/2 to be, and use that to tell me how much another fraction is. So benchmark fractions are fractions that we use in order, they're like reference fractions that we use in order to measure other fractions against them or to compare other fractions with it, okay? So that's what we use a benchmark. So a benchmark is a reference point, kind of like what you're using to gauge the other ones, to measure the other ones against. All right, so they're easy to visualize, things like 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, sometimes 1/3, depending on the quantity that but you're easy to visualize. You can picture in your mind and you can identify it readily. So you can say, it's about 1/2. No, man, it's less than 1/2. Remember with that, so this is kind of what we've been doing so far with our 1/2. We've been kind of benchmarking, or I shouldn't say, but we're using the 1/2 as a benchmark to know what the other fraction is. So that's what we've been doing so far. And this is where we're going to go into the benchmarking of our benchmark fractions and how we use them. Okay, so let's continue with that. So Mr. Limi, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Ms. Harris. Let me get this out of the way first. Right, spotlight. All right, everybody see me, right? Yeah, I would believe so, yeah. Okay. All right, so when as our benchmark fraction. You can type in the chat what that fraction was or is in this scenario. So we have been using a benchmark fraction so far in this session, and I want you to type it in the chat what that fraction is. All right, a half. Mrs. Jones, was that a particular student or was it the entire class?
Class.
Oh, the class. Okay. All right, I'll save that for later then. Yes, so it was a half. We said equal to a half, less than a half, greater than a half, right? So the main benchmark fraction that we have been using so far is a half. Now, on the screen right now, we're gonna have a number line. But before we actually get to that number line, I want to see if you can tell me what this fraction, what is the term that I can use for this fraction? It's a fraction, yes, but what can I call it? What is the name that I can use for that fraction? Not just typing it out in words, fully in words, not the digits. So let's see what you get, or let's see what you come up with. So the fraction that you're seeing on the screen right now, I want you to tell me in words, what can you describe that fraction as? Anyone? Any takers?
Are they giving the name or they're telling us what type of fraction, sir?
Name, sorry, name. All right.
Okay, so you're gonna give us the fraction name, and maybe if you want, and we'd love to
The
throw
type.
that in as well.
Maybe
The type as well,
yeah.
the name
Type would
and
be
the
okay
type.
too. So what type of fraction is it as well? Because we said it earlier in our vocabulary section. So it's 3/5, Alisson, good. And what type of fraction is this 3/5? What type of fraction would we call this? Or what type of fraction would we classify 3/5 to be? All right. All right, you can open your chat too. I mean, the mic, and you can speak if you need to, or you can type in the chat. What type of fraction is 3/5?
So it's
All
3/5.
right.
Raise your hand up.
Oh, it's now lunchtime at the school.
Oh, okay. Yes, a lot of schools have lunchtime now. What decision should we take?
You want to resume in the next, we can start back at least by 12:20, and then we continue. Because most schools would have their lunchtime even at 11:30 or something. So what should I do in this scenario? Yeah, it's lunchtime for everybody, I notice. So let's see. We'll come to a decision in a few seconds. All right, we'll break for half an hour. So we'll resume at 12:40. So we'll resume at 12:40. So you can call it an intermission, not necessarily a short one, but enough or adequate time for the kids and students and teachers alike to get something in their stomachs. So we will resume at 12:40.
Thank you, sir. And if it's okay with you, teachers, we can have a working session continuing. So if it's quite fine for the children to bring their lunch back, if it's okay at your school to do that, they could come back and be eating and listening while we're doing it. So we can finish at 12, resume at 12:40.